G'day Dark Realmers, it's horror author and illustrator Michael J. Elliott here with you again, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Dark Realm Diaries. Today we've got another book and trivia video for you, and this week we're looking at Sheridan Le Fanu's classic vampire novella, Carmilla. Okay, Dark Realmers, now because we have usually a lot of information to try and get through on our videos, I've made a slight change and I've divided our videos up into three unique sections. Section 1 is about the author, Section 2 is about the book, and Section 3 is about the movies and the other adaptations that the book went through. So let's start with the first section, and that's all about the author. Joseph Thomas Sheridan Le Fanu was born on the 18th of August in 1814, and he was born into a very literary family. His grandmother and his great uncle were both playwrights. His mother was also a writer, and his niece, Rhoda Broughton, went on to become a successful novelist. Now, he had an elder sister and a younger brother, and his younger brother William complained to their father, who by the way was a minister in the Church of Ireland, and he complained that they weren't really learning anything from their tutor. So they basically asked to have the tutor dismissed, which their father did. And Sheridan Le Fanu continued his education by teaching himself from reading from his father's library. Now, he went on to study law at Trinity College in Dublin in 1839. But the interesting thing was, he never actually practiced law, even though he was called to the bar in 1839. He went into journalism instead, and he began submitting short stories, and one of his first short stories was called The Ghost and the Bone Seller. Now, in 1840 he actually began to own some newspapers, and he actually owned the Dublin Evening Mail, and he ended up owning several newspapers over his lifetime. Now, he married Susanna Bennett on the 18th of December in 1844, and they had 4 children: Eleanor, Emma, Thomas and George. And Sheridan Le Fanu had a successful career with writing, as we all know, and we'll look soon at his books. And he died at the age of 58 on the 7th of February 1873. Now, Le Fanu wrote many short stories, but his 3 most famous works are Uncle Silas, The House by the Graveyard, and of course Carmilla. Now, Carmilla has a number of claims to fame. First off, it's one of the very earliest examples of vampire fiction. Secondly, it also has a female vampire. And thirdly, it predates Dracula, that's Bram Stoker's Dracula, by a massive 26 years. So you can see why it's become such a classic of the Gothic genre. Now, of course, Carmilla is also known because it has a lesbian love story involved. Now, of course, it's not overt because of the time it was written, of course, but it's definitely there. And the novel tends to show the love between Carmilla and the protagonist Laura as just a very intimate sort of friendship. You know, there's nothing, you don't read anything sexual there, but in one passage Laura actually wonders herself whether Carmilla is wanting something more from her in terms of their friendship. Now, the basic storyline, which is very complex, I won't go into all of it, but basically Laura lives in a castle in Styria with her retired English father, who's retired from the Austrian army, and they now live in this castle together, but she's very lonely. She has no friends, and it's a very isolated existence. Now, her father has arranged for a friend of his to bring his niece to visit Laura, so she won't be so lonely. But the niece dies in mysterious circumstances just before she's due to arrive. Now, after this, just outside their castle is a carriage accident, and they race to the scene, and there's the mother and a few other people and Carmilla. Now the mother says, look, we have urgent business, we can't stay, but could you please look after Carmilla until we can send for her. And she explains, look, don't ask her about her past, don't try and find out anything about her, but she's of sound mind, she's okay. Well, of course, Laura is overwhelmed and overjoyed to have a friend, but Laura herself starts becoming sicker and ill, and that's where the vampirism comes into. And her father becomes suspicious, and the story plays out from there. And one of the things in the story is too that Carmilla is actually just an anagram. She's actually, as a vampire, she's lived for hundreds of years, and she's the Countess Karnstein, and her real name is Makala, which is an anagram of Carmilla. And that's the basic setup of the story, Dark Realmers. Now, of course, you can read more about it and all the other characters, of course, in the novel. And the novel is freely available. It's available, as a free download because it's in the public domain now. But you can also buy revised versions, and of course, you can buy a paperback of the novel too, because it's considered now a work of classic literature. And so, because it has that element of a friendship that borders on a sort of love, which is in some ways a little bit, you wonder if it's unrequited love, but also it's a dark, unholy love, because you wonder whether Carmilla is actually sort of really and truly in love with Laura, or she's just, Laura's just another one of her many, many victims that she's had over the years, and that she's very good at wiling and getting her own way and getting herself ingratiated into the lives of people and other families. So from that point of view, the character development is wonderful. It's a wonderfully psychological read. It's also, as I said, classically Gothic dark. Now, here's a note for my fan Amber. You would be able to read this, Amber, without any problem, and you'd also be able to watch some of the movie versions, which are, some of them are very, very subtle, and some of them, of course, went the full vampire route and decided to show as much as they could. But in this next section, I'm going to be talking about some of the movies that have been adapted, and believe me, there's quite a lot. Now, there's been at least 10 versions of Carmilla filmed, but we're going to be only looking at the top 4, the most well-known ones. And the first one was known as Vampyr, and it was made by Danish director Carl Dreyer. Sorry about that, I had a momentary blank. Okay, now he made the movie and gave it a more supernatural feel, introduced, images of the Grim Reaper and so forth. But the biggest change he made was he deleted any and all references to lesbianism or sexuality. Now, you have to remember at the time too, Dark Realmers, that even though, European cinema was far more advanced in terms of, experimentation and what they would attempt and get away with, there was still the social norms of the day where you didn't talk about sexuality, you certainly didn't show it. Now, in Hollywood, of course, the church had a big say in the way movies were presented, because there was a code that strictly had to be adhered to. Now, I don't know if you know about this, but with bedroom scenes, you weren't allowed to show people, you know, together in bed. There was always, at least in Hollywood, you had to show at least one person having their foot on the floor, and that was supposed to represent that they weren't actually undressed or doing anything, you know. That one concentrated more on the vampirism which was behind Carmilla itself. Now, another well-known version was one that was directed by Roddy Vadim in 1960, and it was called Et mourir de plaisir, which translates as "and to die of pleasure," but it was actually released worldwide as Blood and Roses. You can check that one out too, because it's interesting to see the differences between the cultures that make movies, okay? And you'll see this all the time, Dark Realmers. Hollywood has got a tradition of remaking films from Britain and Europe and so forth, and it's interesting to see how one culture approaches a movie and so forth, as compared to the original country where the movie was made. Now, here's a bonus fact for you, just something I thought you'd like to know. Roddy Vadim was a very prolific filmmaker, and at different times of his life, he was married to both Brigitte Bardot, the well-known film actress and sex symbol, and Jane Fonda. And this movie is very, as you can imagine, it's very surreal, it's very dark, but it's got that wonderful French take on things like you know, sex and sexuality, and it's probably, you know, more a little on the erotic side, you know, which isn't to say it doesn't follow the story very well, but that's one to check out for yourselves, Dark Realm. Now, the next version to hit the screen came in 1964, and it was an Italian version called hang on, how do I say this? La Cripta El Incubo, which probably makes me sound more Spanish than anything else, so I do apologise for that, Dark Realmers, hey, sorry. But basically that translates as Vault of Horror. Christopher Lee obviously is the star of this film, and he has a number of Italian co-stars. So it's interesting if you compare Roddy Vadim's version and how he approached the story of Carmilla compared with the Italian version. And it's interesting to see how two different European filmmakers can take the same subject and weave it and change it and make it very much their own project. Now, you'd expect that classic British movie company Hammer to make their version of Carmilla, and you'd be right. They did make a version called The Vampire Lovers in 1970, and it starred Ingrid Pitt as Carmilla and Madeline Smith as Laura. And in this movie, they very much play up and make a lot of references to the Countess of Karnstein link, which is present in the book. And they went on to make a few more vampire movies that actually had this link to Countess Karnstein and the House of Karnstein, and so forth. So it was, although they weren't sequels by any means, they were more standalone films, but they tried very hard to show that Carmilla may be part of a larger sort of dynasty of vampires, if you like, okay? And of course, like most of the classic old Hammer films, you can get that on DVD today, Dark Realmers. It's wonderful. Now, before I end this section, Dark Realmers, I just want to tell you about a version that I saw right here on YouTube. And like all the others, it was totally different from each of the ones I've mentioned today, because this one was set in America just after the Civil War. And it starred Meg Tilly, and Roy Dotrice played her father. And the best part was that it was also starred the wonderful late Roddy McDowell. And this one was different in the fact that the carriage accident, Roy Dotrice, Laura's father, checks and finds they're all dead apart from Carmilla. So, they have to, put the bodies in crates and so forth, and Carmilla stays with them. Now, pardon me. It's while she's there that we get to see that there's something, a little bit creepy about this version of Carmilla. She never eats, she sleeps long time during the day, and she strangely sort of always tends to feel sick at mealtime, so she never eats. And of course we all know what that means. Well, there's a theory going around that the people in the South, now it's not sort of really mentioned whether they mean the South, as in the South states of the USA, or just the south of the area where they're living, people are suffering from this very unusual plague. Well, of course, we know it's not a plague, it's actually vampirism. But into this comes the wonderful Roddy McDowell, who instantly suspects that Carmilla is a vampire. But he's not the only one. They have a wonderful housekeeper, and she's very much into perhaps, not really explained, but perhaps African magic or whatever, because she's a negress, and she attempts to sort of protect Laura by placing charms and beads around her door, and she ends up suffering the wrath of Carmilla, and that's quite a scary scene, Dark Realmers, because Carmilla sort of summons or turns herself into a horde of bats that just basically bite her to death. Okay, and that's a wonderful take on the story. It sticks very much to the original story, with a few embellishments, of course. But you can watch that one right here on YouTube, and if you have enjoyed, or you've gone and found out all the other versions I've mentioned to you, don't forget, check this one out too, just to nicely round out your sort of movie feast, if you want to call it that. Okay, Dark Realmers, thank you so much for joining me. That's it for our look at Carmilla. Thank you so much for being part of it. I hope you like the new background. It's not permanent. I haven't found one I really like, but hey, it's a lot more interesting than you having to stare at my Daleks and my Marvel figurines, okay? Well, I think so anyway. Okay, well, I hope you've had fun and learned a few things. I certainly learned a few things researching this one for you, and I love looking through classic literature because there's some wonderful examples from the world of horror there. Okay, well, as I said, if you've enjoyed this, please hit the subscribe button, because we have some wonderful content that we love sharing with you, and we upload the Dark Realm Diaries every Friday. That's every Friday Australian time. So for people in North America and the Northern Hemisphere, that's on a Thursday. Okay, now if you have liked our little presentation today, please hit like, and also feel free to leave a comment, because I love hearing from you and what you thought of each particular video and what you'd like to see yourselves, okay? So that's it from me, author Michael J. Elliott. Thank you so much once again for watching, and as I always say to you at the end of every episode, Dark Realmers, stay in the light. Bye for now.